Hello, my friends. Welcome back to the Non-Toxic Environment Show. This is your host, Andy Pace. We have a returning guest on our show this week, Bill Weber with AVELAR. Bill was on our show a few months ago, and we talked about indoor air quality issues in regards to mold and bacteria and how to sleuth things out in the home. I like to call Bill Sherlock Holmes without the L. He has this amazing ability to find the root of a problem inside of a home, and through the use of extensive testing, visual inspections, Bill and the whole crew at AVELAR really know how to get down to the bottom of the problem. Now, before we move forward with the show, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel to make sure you receive updates of all these new shows coming out. So today on the show, Bill and I will be discussing the various methods of testing, from dust testing to air testing, all the different types of air sampling available, and what it actually means. What does it show? What does it find? And if you're somebody who might be very experienced in this, you've been going through it with your own personal health journey in your own homes, much of this information might be seeming a bit simple. On the other hand, for those of you in the audience who are just experiencing this for the first time, you are a neophyte, you have purchased your first home, you moved into your first apartment, and you're having health issues as it relates to mold, and you need to know what is the next step or what is the first step. This is definitely your episode. So please have a listen, share with friends. Thank you. Hey, welcome back to the show, Bill. Good to see you.
Good to see you too, Andy. Thanks for having me back again.
Oh, of course. I've had so many people reach out to me since I think it was November of last year when you were on the show, and just really excited about the things we talked about, and obviously really excited about the things you had to say. And we're just looking forward to having you back on to kind of drill down a little bit more into. Today, I want to talk more specifically about the testing methods that are out there. It's just so much confusion, really so much confusion about this. And you really are the perfect person to talk about this with. Now, I do want to sort of tease this. Later on in the show, we're going to talk about, you'll be speaking at a major event this coming June, I believe.
Yep.
Okay. And so, I want you to talk about that with us for a bit at that time. So,
okay.
All right. To start, just kind of refresh everybody's memory, Bill, exactly who you are and what you do.
Sure. I think we coined the term in the last show that
we did. Sherlock Holmes.
I think we coined the forensic IEP, right?
Yes, the forensic IEP.
Indoor environmental professional.
You got it.
And so the company that I work for is AVELAR, which is a company full of experts in architecture, engineering, construction, and then I run the environmental department here.
Excellent. And so, yeah, that's why I refer to you as Sherlock Holmes, not Holmes with an L, but Holmes. You are the expert who, if we're trying to sleuth out problems in a home, the family's getting sick, where is it coming from? You are the guy to go into that home and find out exactly what is happening. And again, perfect person to talk about with these topics today. So let's start off with this. There are many different tests in the home for mold specifically, or the components of mold, I'll say, ranging from dust tests to air sampling and so forth. Can you explain kind of the differences between the types of tests that are out there?
Yeah, actually, there are about 18 different sampling methods for mold. And I think the most commonly used that we see out there is what's called air sampling. And so what the air sampling is a typically there's different types of air sampling for different durations. We've seen durations as long as 48 hours of an air pump operating and drawing air. But typically, what we'll see from someone who uses air sampling is a 5-minute draw. And in that 5-minute draw, Andy, they're really drawing only about 2.6 cubic feet of air for those 5 minutes. So if you think of like a medicine ball,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think what now all testing methods have their benefits and their disadvantage. Every single one of those 18. And as long as people understand what those limits are, I think that they all have their place. To understand that they have a problem or not based upon one or two or three air sampling tests, I think really will mislead people in the wrong direction. In fact, one of my most common calls, Andy, is when I have a client who's been referred by a physician and said, I wish I would have known you about 2 years ago. Because two
Right.
years ago, we suspected mold might be an issue. So, I went online, I got someone come out here and do air sampling. They took air samples. Maybe they did some moisture evaluation or maybe even infrared camera. And they said, no problem. All the air sampling was normal. And in fact, it wasn't, but they were relying on 2.6 cubic feet of air at a particular time, space and time to really only draw in spores.
Mm.
And so if you think of mold structure like a pine tree, the spore is the pine cone,
Mm-hmm.
but you're not looking for the pine needles, the branches, the bark, the sap, the roots, the pollen, and like a mold structure, all of those are components of the mold structure. And the air sampling, even though it can also pull in hyphal fragments, usually the lab will also count hyphal fragments or hyphal elements. It's really the spores that it's counting. And so if the spores aren't present during that extraction process, then you're not going to really know how many are there. Not only that, but when you really understand what kind of draw and what's going on that slide that's in the cassette, is that air is impacting it with all the stuff that's in the air. And molds like chetomium, for instance, chetomium is like an overinflated football. And it's when it's tumbling through that tube and onto that slide might not be able to catch it, all depending on where it hits on that football.
Okay.
I mean, if it hits on the point on the end of it, it might just bounce off and not go through. So when I see just one spore of chetomium, I know there's probably a lot more, and we were lucky to capture that. Another variable with air sampling is how much debris is in the air. So labs will tell you that there's a debris rating from like 0 to 5 or 1 to 4. Each lab is a little bit different. And when there's a lot of debris, that debris will cover the slide before the mold can. And so we can have some inaccuracies there. And I think the other one is just that it is just a moment of time. And it's dependent on how agitated or how disturbed the air is. And that'll determine what you end up really drawing in. So, for instance, if in your home, Andy, if you weren't there for, let's say, 48 hours, nobody was in the house at all, the HVAC wasn't running, the windows were closed, and I tiptoed in with my air sampler and I drew a sample, probably wouldn't get much in that air sample. Right. But if I took a leaf blower into that same room and I blew an aggressive sample, I probably wouldn't be able to read the slide. And so it's really dependent on what's in the air at the given time.
Mm. Wow, that's a great description. I've told people it's just a snapshot in time. And so as you're talking, I'm thinking to myself, you could either take an hour's worth of video of something or take a picture.
Yes.
Which one's going to give you a better overall story of what's happening, right? And so
Absolutely.
The air sample is a picture. And then on the flip side, a dust test, I assume, would be the video, would be the longer term what's happened over a larger period of time. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, we really need to know what the question is that we want to answer. So if we want to find out, is there a current problem, it takes some work on the occupants on the occupant side. More specifically, if we want to know if something is going on now, the best way to do that is to do a reset cleaning of that house, to use a HEPA vacuum, to use electrostatic cloths and microfibers to really clean everything and get it to a baseline where we don't have the influence of old data, if you will.
Okay.
And then what happens is after that reset cleaning, then we want to start accumulating dust. The duration of that is dependent on really kind of how old and drafty the house is. So, for instance, a home that's built in the, let's say, early 1900s is going to be a lot more drafty than a home that's built in 2025, right? There's different codes that were required, different energy requirements, things like that. And so it's going to take a lot longer for dust to accumulate in a brand new house that was just built as opposed to an older home. So generally speaking, it takes about 4 to 6 weeks to accumulate enough dust. Now, when I say enough dust, what I like doing is collecting one dust sample for every 500 to 600 square feet.
Okay.
And a couple reasons for that. One is that we need enough dust in order to make a good decision. And so, although the ERMI requires at least 5 milligrams of dust, I'd like to see about 20 to maybe 50 milligrams of dust on that cloth that's being evaluated, because that's a good sense of what's going on. The lower that it gets, I think the more potential for a false positive, because it really doesn't have a sense of what's been accumulating over a period of time. I know that's a lot of information, and for a beginner, it can get a little bit more complicated. But really, when we're really trying to understand the fungal ecology of a building, there's really good methods to get really good data. Not to say that if we did something else, we wouldn't get good data, but I just want to make sure that if I'm making big decisions on what's going to happen in someone's life and their livelihood and their castle, that I want to be as accurate as possible. And yeah.
So let's kind of break that down just a little bit for those, for the neophytes in the audience that are just getting into this right now. So you mentioned a test, ERMI, and this is a very common test method. There's also one called a HERTSMI test, and these two, with some people, they use them interchangeably, or they don't know which one they should use. So, what is an ERMI test? What is a HERTSMI test?
Well, I'm going to start off by first saying that the ERMI is a panel of mold species, 36 specific species, and it's analyzed through qPCR. That's the way that it's processed. So when we call it ERMI, we're telling that machine to look for 36 specific mold species that were part of a study by Dr. Vesper back in 2007.
Okay.
And in that study, they started with a lot more species than 36 that they were looking for.
Because there are thousands of species.
There's over 100,000 named species.
Wow. And
this is only a small sampling of that. Well, how did they come to that? Well, in this gross amount of mold species that they were testing for, what they saw essentially are these 36 were the most popular across the country.
Okay.
And the more samples that you have, the more costly that test is going to be. So there was a price point. In order to get a price that was reasonable for someone to spend money on, and data to collect out of it. There is a lab that they helped us with adding a few different species in addition to the ERMI. It's called an ERMI +3, where we added fusarium, which has a lot of known toxins and is inflammatory, Ulocladium chartarum, and Ulocladium botrytis. And Ulocladium chartarum is a great chronic water damage indicator that isn't on the ERMI panel. But the ERMI panel in and of itself, and I'm going to refer to it as the ERMI panel rather than the ERMI test, is a great way to understand the fungal ecology of a given area. I think it's a great litmus test, if you will. And I know earlier I just said that I like taking it in 500 to 600 square foot increments, because inevitably, if you take one or two out of the house, one upstairs and one downstairs, and they come up elevated, or what we think is elevated, where is it? Right? So then we have to take more tests to now try to narrow it down. And so when we take it in that 500 to 600 square foot increments, I think what's nice about that is now when you have this comparative of all the different zones in the house, you can start narrowing the issue, or you can find out that it's a systemic issue, like all the windows in the house, or all the siding, or all the stucco in the house, because all the samples will be nearly this, really close to each other.
Well, I was going to say then, so the mold is only traveling a certain, at least for testing purposes, you're thinking it's only traveling a certain distance. Obviously, it can get throughout the entire house through the HVAC system and so forth. But at least this starts to help us pinpoint a quadrant of the home that's more problematic.
Correct.
And so then it goes back to your first point of, knowing exactly where it's coming from, and not just doing an air sample where you have no idea what's happening. This starts to pinpoint a little bit, give us more information about where to start looking, doing physical investigations.
Absolutely. And not only do I want to do it in the living space, Andy, I want to do it in the attic. I want to do it in the crawl space. And the most important thing, I mean, if you're taking notes watching this, we need one from outside.
Yes.
We need one from outside, because the outside has an influence on the inside. And I can't tell you, Andy, how many times where the ERMI panel scoring shows an elevation, but when the outside sample is taken, that outside could be a higher elevation than the inside.
Sure.
And we're looking for the rank order of species between inside and outside to determine what influence. Especially when we talk about, in California, we have our Central California agriculture and livestock area. And as you know, with agriculture, you stir up that soil, right? It's after all the harvest is done, you stir up that and start preparing the fields. And when that stirring up happens, how much aspergillus and penicillium is getting into the air? And then those air currents take it, and depending on what time of the year that you sample, what's going on with the leaves that are falling from the tree, or the grinding of the soil, or even the gardeners down the block who are blowing the leaves and the clippings, just in your neighbor or across the street, can have an impact on air sampling and the dust sampling. So that's why it's so important to grab a sample from the outside.
That makes tons of sense. And then you can also look at that list and say, well, I imagine on the ERMI panel, there are specific species that are almost always found either outdoors. They should be outdoors. If they're found indoors, it's because of what you're talking about, this transference of having the doors and windows open, whatever's on your person when you walk into the house. But then there's also species that almost always show up because of water damaged building materials.
100%. Let me give you a couple that are the indicator molds that I look for. So if we're wondering or wanting to know if there's a chronic leak, something that is a slow drip over a long period of time, that needed months in order for it to really grow, I'm looking for chetomium. How many spore equivalents per milligram of dust do we have of chetomium? I look for Scopulariopsis chartarum, Stachybotrys chartarum. I look for this Ulocladium chartarum. Those four molds, if they come up if one or more of those come up on an ERMI panel, I'm looking for a long-term leak, and that can be from a leaking door, a leaking window, a leaking pipe,
Mm,
typically,
right. Right.
or usually not a roof leak so much, because if it's a slow leak for a long period of time, we're actually usually seeing the conditions
Mm,
through that are visible in the ceilings,
sure. Right.
right? But if we have those others, then I'm looking for a long-term leak, as opposed to penicillium and aspergillus types or Wallemia, where those are what are called xerophilic, and they're primary colonizers that need very little water. And I'm looking for maybe a humidity situation as opposed to a long-term water damage.
Wow. It is so much more than just the initial, okay, you have mold in the house. And this is where I see, and I'll be honest, I've used air sampling kits. I like to use them for testing for things like VOCs and formaldehyde.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, for mold, the ones that I've worked with essentially just counts like sort of active mold spores. But I always say it's a blip in time.
Yeah.
It all depends on what the airflow is of the house. If you but and they can be extremely detailed with the count, but it's what goes across that device as it's operating, and so we use it as a tool in the tool belt. It's not going to solve the problem and tell us exactly where the problem is, but using things like this in conjunction with one another, provided that we have an IEP who is essentially administering the tests and understands now why are we doing this next one, because we're
Right.
looking for something specific to say positive, negative. So
Yes.
it's essentially like doing any type of medical work, really.
I liken it to, the doctor will, you go through your physical, and the
Mm-hmm.
doctor says, "Hey, I'm going to take these. I'm going to order these 12 tests from the lab,"
Mm-hmm.
right? Because he needs those, or he or she needs those 12 tests in order to really understand, your glucose levels and your, all these things that are going on in your body.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go to the lab, and the lab person is about to draw your blood, and you go, you know what? I think I only want 7 of these done, right? And the lab person says, well, your doctor said, do these 12. And you go, I know that, but I just want these 7 done. And then they do the labs, and the doctor calls you back to talk to you about what they found, and and you have all these questions that say, so what about this, and am I healthy about this? And the doctor says, well, if you would have had all 12 done, I could give you all those answers, but you decided to only have 7 done, so I can
Uh-huh.
only give you some of those answers. And
Right.
that's how I feel about mold sampling,
Well, that
is
makes
that,
sense.
it takes, it is expensive, but in order to answer the questions that in a lot of cases we really need, especially when you can't see anything that's going on,
Right.
it takes time, it takes energy, and it takes, unfortunately, money to really understand that.
Yeah, that makes sense. But if it's a home you own, this is your biggest investment of your life, and for most people, it's the biggest investment. And it's not only an investment as an asset, but it's also an investment for your own personal health. And so, if this is supposed to be your healing sanctuary, having a mold problem in the home or a bacterial issue in the home is something that it does need to be rooted out. And so, I want to touch on one of the other tests that we hear a lot about, which is the HERTSMI test.
Yeah.
Maybe you can just kind of shed some light on that one for us.
Yeah. So the HERTSMI panel,
Mm-hmm. Panel, yes, thank
right?
you.
Because essentially what's happened is we had the ERMI panel, which is 36 different molds,
Mm-hmm.
and Dr. Richie Shoemaker and David Lark uh, did a study of 807 patients, and what the goal was to determine if, after being treated for chronic inflammatory response syndrome, what was that reentry program like, getting back into that living environment that they were? What was the litmus test after remediation
Mm.
and after they've been through their SIRS detox, if you will. I know it's not a detox, but you know what I mean.
Sure.
The inflammation has gone down.
Right.
So their study, what they did is they took 5 of those mold species that are on the ERMI, and those were Stachybotrys, Aspergillus versicolor, Chaetomium globosum, uh, Aspergillus penicilloides, and Wallemia sebi, and they put a rank number to them based upon the quantities that were in the dust collection test. And what they were able to find was it was about a 97% accuracy rate when that HERTSMI score was less than 10, that someone who is diagnosed with SIRS could re-enter that living place and still be able to heal and be well.
So, are there any situations where somebody would use both panels, like before and after?
No, I think that the one of the big differences is just the cost.
Ah,
So
okay.
the typical cost of the ERMI is going to be somewhere around $250
Mm-hmm.
for that panel test, whereas I've seen pretty on average the HERTSMI is about $180.
Well, I guess that makes sense. You're looking for less, right? You're not doing as much, you know, digging through the dust to find exactly, all those 36 species versus you said 5. Yeah, makes sense.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, 36 versus 5. Now for me, if we want to know what the HERTSMI looks like, we can still get the ERMI panel because those 5 species are in there. And if the lab doesn't calculate it, there's a calculation that you can get online that says, okay, if it's between this many and this many spore equivalents, we'll give a rating of 4 or 6 or 8. For the HERTSMI score, so you can see where that sample lies on the HERTSMI scoring.
Okay, got it. So, generally speaking, then anybody who is let's again bring it back to the neophyte here. Bring it back to
Yeah.
the first timer. You're a first time homeowner. You understand that there is a mold situation happening in the home because you can feel something going on. Somebody in the household's having these massive effects. Definitely, the first thing to be doing would be to reach out to an IEP and to look at doing multiple ERMI tests around the home to try to start to sort of pinpoint the quadrant of the home where it's coming from.
Yes, I
Okay.
agree 100%. Now, for me, the HERTSMI, um, I don't. I would like to see a neophyte
Mhm.
use the ERMI panel because that additional monies I think has value because I want to know what other molds might be present that aren't on the HERTSMI test. I want to know about those other 31
Sure.
because just there they might have a reaction to different mold species that are on the HERTSMI,
Mhm.
and I don't want the HERTSMI to be kind of an end all be all. It is absolutely a useful test, and if the money isn't there, then it's useful.
Okay. That
I'll
makes
just,
perfect.
I'll just end it like that.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So let me kind of switch positions on this a little bit in that we're now not talking about the neophyte. We're talking about somebody who there's a family of 5 living in the house, and one of the 5 is a diagnosed with SIRS, chronic inflammatory response syndrome caused by mold. But the rest of the household has absolutely no problem at all. You see an ERMI test come back or a ERMI panel done. I have to keep on telling myself that word. ERMI panels come back and say in 2 of the 4 quadrants of the home, the levels are 15, 16, and 2 of the other panels are maybe below 10. Does this mean that the whole house is harming everybody in that household, or is SIRS such a unique disease that folks with SIRS are going to react severely at that level, but those who don't have any mold sensitivities at all probably won't even notice?
Yeah, that's a hard question for me to answer.
Okay,
I want to leave most of that for the doctors
got
to
it.
be able to respond to because I don't like talk I'm not qualified
Okay,
to talk on the health
yeah,
of the occupants, but
sure,
rather what the fungal ecology is,
got it.
so that they're armed with information that they can go back to the doctor and say, all right, this is what Bill Weber found, or
Hmm.
this is what AVELAR found, or this is what the IEP found in my house.
Sure.
And what do you think about this, doctor? And do you think that what you're seeing in my testing for SIRS correlates with what's going on in my
Right.
house?
Right.
So I think that um, how I would like to address that is the scoring. Because you talked about a 16 and a 15 and an under 10 and all of
Right.
that,
Right.
and I want to make it clear to your listeners that it's really not about the score. It's about the rank order of the species and the quantity of the species in
Got it.
comparison to the other areas in and out of the building.
Okay.
All right. So in this Northern California area that I do much of my work, we see a lot of Penicillium brevicompactum in the outside sample. And if that test was only in the inside, we'd probably see a lot of Penicillium brevicompactum, more than what the geometric mean is for a Penicillium brevicompactum inside of a house. And that worries a lot of people. And so, even though the score might be low for the overall test, we need to know really what that Penicillium brevicompactum is, where it's coming from, and is that an outdoor influence, or do we have a problem on the inside, for instance? So the scoring doesn't necessarily tell you that. The scoring is really, I think, a quick look of, do I have a problem or not?
Sure.
But
Yeah.
as we get into the details of it, where do we have the problem and how much of a problem is it? Like, how worried do I need to be?
Right. And my thought process on that question is, coming from a lot of my clients who will reach out and say, this is what's going on with them, but my family is supportive, but they don't get it. And so
Mhm.
when you have
All the
one
time.
family member who has severe reactions, a severe inflammatory response, mast cell activation, and then the wife or the husband just, I mean, they're supportive and they see what's going on with their spouse, but they don't have that same reaction, and so it's hard for them to say, well, there's a problem here because I don't see anything in the house. I don't see any problem. How
Yeah.
come, how come this home is killing you where it's perfectly fine for me?
Yeah. So I'm also on the IEP committee for the ISEAI, which is the International Society for Environmentally Acquired Illness.
Mm-hmm.
And our committee wrote a document that's really helpful for family members of those with biotoxin illness.
Mm.
So, not SIRS specific, but biotoxin illness that explains what that person is going through. I think on the survivingmold.com website, there is also some information that those that are kind of suffering right now can help those that aren't suffering understand what they're going through. Because most people look fine, like their outward appearance is fine. They're still able to get up in the morning and go to the store for the most part. There's several clients that I've had that have chronic fatigue, and they can only operate for maybe 4 hours a day. There's others that have so much cognitive uh, uh, issues that really everything that we need to do is in writing or recorded so that they can review it 3, 4, or
Mm,
5 times.
right.
So it's just really, it varies. And I think that it's just really important for the family members just to have some grace and some understanding. I think that's just really, really important. And that those that are sick, I know that my wife, when I'm sick, she goes, "Man, you're really hard to be around when you got a cold.
Right.
You know, you're so needy and you're so
Mhm.
grumpy." And I just say, just have some grace. I'll get through it real
Mhm.
quick. You
Right.
know,
Right.
so it's kind of like that same thing.
Yeah, for sure. I know when I started my career 30 some years ago, we talked about chemical sensitivity. That was the big thing for the
Sure.
first 25 years of my careers. Chemical sensitivity, MCS, the whole
Hmm.
concept of chronic inflammatory response, mast cell activation, mold sensitivity didn't really start, at least in conversation with clients until 2015, 2016. I'll be honest. These are acronyms or phrases that just weren't on the tip of people's
Yeah.
tongues. But now, out of the 15, 20 people I talk to on a daily basis, I would say 75% of them, that's the very first thing they bring up is mold or bacterial sensitivities, or injury. And
Yep.
so we've seen this completely, flipping. But we also know that the things like SIRS or MCAS is actually causing multiple chemical sensitivity. It used to be that MCS was the disease, or at least it was be thought of as a disease, and now we're realizing that it's simply not simply, but it is a symptom of an underlying issue such as SIRS.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of the clients absolutely have chemical sensitivities as well.
Hmm.
It's just even more important that in the remediation process and the repair process,
Hmm.
that the contractors, the remediation contractors, of which I was for since 1998, um, I did mold remediation almost on a daily basis,
Wow.
and the sensitivities were amazing. I mean, just plastic. I had a couple clients where we couldn't even use the poly
Wow.
because the oily residue has an odor to it,
Hmm.
and so we ended up getting Tyvek to
Yeah.
build our containments with,
Wow.
and the spray glue that you would use to keep up the containments over a long period of time.
Hmm.
No, we had to use tension bars and things like that to keep containments up. So very well aware of multiple chemical sensitivities. It's something that we're is in our training. It's through SIRSX. Me and several other IEPs created some training. It's called Medically Important Remediation
Nice.
101. And
Yeah.
Michael Schranz is with Environmental Analytics. I think that he might have been on your show
Yep.
before. He and I just completed, and it's also on the SIRS website, Medically Important Assessments 101.
Hmm. Hmm.
And we talk about multiple chemical sensitivities and understanding that in the process.
Oh, that's great. That's a fantastic thing you're doing there, because I spend a lot of time working with contractors, remediators around the country, kind of doing that sort of one-on-one with them, because they
Hmm.
have a client, it might be their first client they ever had, that said, if you're going to remediate, you need to avoid anything that has this, that, and the other, and they have no idea really what the first step is, and so I'll walk them through that process. So thank you for doing that, and
Yeah.
it's really well needed. So you kind of tiptoed on that subject. So you're going to be speaking at the big conference, the SIRSX conference, coming up this summer.
Yeah, in June in Tempe, Arizona. We
Nice,
have the SIRS conference coming up. Michael Schranz and I we have a half day pre-conference workshop where we're
nice.
going to talk about myths and misconceptions in remediation and in assessments. So
Mm,
we're hitting three popular myths and misconceptions in each category, uh, talking about why we categorize it as a misconception or a myth, and then speak some truth, uh, and we're excited about that. I think that that's really useful, especially for the assessors who get questioned about air sampling versus other sampling, or remediation contractors. Why are they doing it that way? And why is maybe their estimate is more than another estimate, and they want to justify it by how many rounds of cleaning, or something like that.
Mhm.
And then I have a separate presentation that I'll be giving on. Earlier, I talked about 18 different methodologies for testing. One of the ones that I utilize a lot is collecting dust for culturable analysis.
Hmm.
So the difference of one thing about ERMI is that it doesn't differentiate between mold that's alive, mold that's dormant, and mold that is dead.
Got it.
And so if you had a 1940s building that we're testing, and we have an elevated ERMI, the question is that active or is that old?
Mm.
And with the ERMI or in the HERTSMI, you just don't know. It could be mold from an incident that happened in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s,
Wow.
and you wouldn't know that. So the culturable analysis not only will help us understand whether something is viable or not, but it also gives us a wider breadth of what mold species might be present. Because again, the ERMI only has 36 different mold species. The culturable gives us an opening to the other 999,900, and you know what I'm saying? It's
Right.
whatever it ends up growing on those culture plates, and so it just gives us an opportunity for more information to make some better decisions.
Wow. It's amazing to think about, Bill. This is just a vast amount of information that's out there.
Yeah,
Obviously, a lot of information that you have to, keep up in your head on a regular basis while you're talking to people about this. But it also shows that we've come a long way too, in
yeah.
that, again, 10 years ago, we wouldn't have the ability to have these types of conversations. And what's come out in the last 10 years from research, and now the work that people like you are doing, it's really helping us understand our built environment
Yeah.
and the possibilities, the problems, and then the areas where we have the ability to fix and improve our situation.
I'm thankful to all those that got in front of me and helped me with all of this too. The John Bantas of the world, the Michael Schrantz, the Richie Shoemaker, all of all the doctors that, I mean, we didn't even touch on bacteria
Right.
in your show today, but there's just so much more out there that we have yet to understand.
Right.
The actinomycetes is this really new, and we're trying to understand how that is working in the indoor built environment. Beta glucans, all these different indicators of problems indoor. The good thing about mold is that it's been around for a long time now, and we can use that as a surrogate for most issues. And definitely a shout out to all those ahead of me here, and those that are rowing with me in this. And
For sure.
I love the amount of caring compassion of those that are around, and really that's truly why we do this.
Right. Yeah, I think all of us who have been in this particular, I'll call it industry, for as long as we all have, it's definitely a labor of love. We are. I'm fueled by the folks that reach out and just thank me for passing along the information that experts like you can provide, and I really appreciate your commitment to this. And you are right. Talking about bacteria, it will probably be the subject of our next talk, Bill, because that's another hour right there at least.
Yeah.
And that's certainly something that if mold wasn't being talked about 10 years ago with my consulting clients, bacteria is something that is just starting to trickle on the waves now of conversation. And I think in the next 5 to 10 years, this could be as important, probably is as important, but we'll have as much information about it as we do about mold.
Sure. I think one of the topics that I heard at a earlier conference was that we all think that we're made of water,
Hmm.
but really we're made of bacteria. You
Hmm.
and I have Our bodies are a mixture of this positive and negative gram bacteria, and we're just walking vessels for bacteria. So it's just
Okay.
really an interesting world, this microbiology world that we live in, and I just looked forward to continuing to learn more about it and helping more people with knowledge and experience.
Fantastic. Bill, as always, great conversation.
Yeah.
Um, Everybody, I'll be posting in the show notes links to Bill at AVELAR, links to the CERSX conference. The CERSX conference it's designed for professionals, but you do have some consumers also showing up, and I think
We
it's just a
do.
chance for everybody to listen.
Yeah, so it's definitely for the integrative functional doctors, allergens. We've had dermatologists there, chiropractors there,
Mhm.
also assessors, the
Mm,
environmental assessors, remediation contractors are now really starting to pay attention. We're really trying to expand a network of contractors around the country. That's what the training was all about. Is really trying to uh, raise up the next group of remediation contractors that are sensitive to medically important remediation. And then we do have, I've had a number of clients who ended up going to the conference and just wanting to know more. And oftentimes the clients actually become assessors or building biologists or something like
nice.
that because it robbed them years of their life, and they don't want to see that happen to other people, and they start getting committed to helping others, and they can do that through this through education and going to conferences like this.
It's kind of an awakening, right? You go through this personally, and your family goes through it with you, and as you say, you spend years figuring these things out, and then you develop this vast amount of knowledge. Well, maybe it's time to pass it along to others, and so I'm really excited to see what happens in this down the road. CERSX, the Building Biology Institute, Change the Air Foundation, all these great organizations that are out there, really with the same goal in mind, coming from different avenues, different directions. And I think it's an exciting time, really. It's a very
Yep.
exciting time to be involved in this because of all of the information that's available.
Yeah, and also make sure you put a link for the ISEAI as
Mhm.
well .org, because there's a lot of good documents and resources that we've posted.
Right,
And they're very, very helpful. From what do I do with my contents?
right.
What kind of testing is out there? What should I be asking a remediation contractor? What do I do with family members who just really don't understand what I'm going through? The committee has just done some really, really good work over the last few years.
Yeah, I refer people to their microparticle cleaning protocol all the time.
Oh, good. Yeah,
Yeah.
the small particle cleaning.
Hmm.
Awesome.
Yep.
Appreciate that.
Excellent. Bill, always a pleasure. We could
Thank
talk
you, Andy.
for hours, but next topic will be bacteria, I'm sure. All right.
Okay. Talk
Thank
to
you
you
so
then.
much. All right.
All right.